I was just saying before we came on, we have been listening to many of our attendees and many of the people that have asked for this specific subject today. And we are delighted to be able to introduce Samantha Armstrong, who has worked in education for 18 years as a teacher in SENCO, and now for the Specialist Teaching and Learning Service. Her role involves supporting children with a range of special educational needs who attend a mainstream educational setting from the ages of 3 through to 18, isn't it? Around that sort of age group.
Yeah, around that age. So my personal background is more around 3 to 11. Yeah. But as a part of my job, I work with colleagues that take children right up to the age of 19.
And you, of course, one of the main reasons we're talking today as well is you're very closely involved with the EHCP process and work on other services such as SALT, OT and educational psychology. Can you, first of all, give us a bit of a insight into your background? I always like to go back to what was your inspiration? Where did you come to be and where you are today?
So I started as a teacher straight out of university. I always had a particular passion for SEN, and I went into special needs education quite early on in my career and worked as a SENCO, and then I worked in some quite specific parts of education, so working with travelling children and things like that. And then I had my own children through adoption, and both of them have quite complex needs. And it led me down a new pathway, really. And I ended up working for the Specialist Teaching and Learning Service, which is a job I absolutely love. And my job is all about working as an outreach worker with mainstream schools to improve their knowledge, improve the support that they give to children with SEN, help identify those children who could use, EHCPs or maybe specialist placements, and help build the package of support that goes around that. And I love it. It's fantastic. But it's really come from that background, that love of wanting to be an SEN, really.
And where did that come from? Where did that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm an adopted child myself, so I suppose there was a little bit of me that grew up in a family where, we talked a lot about trauma and understanding where we all came from and some of the challenges that we face as children that have been in care. So that's part of it, I think, is that. And then just a personal deep knowledge, want of knowledge, wanting to follow that pathway.
Well, I know we've met because you've come on to our FASD parent carer support groups at FASD Awareness, and your fount of knowledge has been very helpful and advice to others as well. And that comes also from your own personal experience, doesn't it, with your
so I have 2 children. My son is he's 5, and he has technically suspected FASD. We have no official diagnosis, and he has autism and other complex needs that are involved within that spectrum. And in the last 6 months, we've just brought home our daughter as well, who is 2.5 and also has suspected fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So we're working within those daily challenges that all of you guys face, sleep and food and schools and all of those general day-to-day dramas of living in a world with children who have quite complex needs. So I do it both at work but also in my personal life as well.
And I think this is one of those lovely rarities, if I may say, that you have that lived experience and you have that understanding and you talk to people that are going through the same things that you go through. And so therefore you come at it from a very different professional angle, don't you?
Yeah, I think for me, I recognize that my job is not to tell you guys about your children. You are the experts in your children. My job is to help open pathways and doorways for you guys, so make life easier if I can, and to point people in the right direction for the support that they need, but not to tell people how to parent their children or how they're, or to presume that I know more about your child than you do, because as parents we know that we are the experts of our children. I may have additional knowledge that I can help you with, but ultimately you guys are the experts in your own children.
And one of the issues that so many of our families face on a daily basis is we all seem to have this battle, a battle to be able to get the access to services that we know that our children need. And it's that which pushes us and gives us that that knowledge, and we search. You were saying your search for knowledge. We are searching for knowledge, a language that we can use to be able to get the services that we know that the children need. Is that something that
Yeah, absolutely. I think my biggest advice, if you're navigating this with your children in schools or in the education system, whether they're nursery, school, college, further, whatever they're doing, is that you need to put yourself in the place of being the expert and hold yourself to and hold that standard. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to parents is, don't let them call you mum and dad in a meeting. You are a first name, you are a person, and you have the same, you're at the same level as everybody else in a meeting. So when you go into a professional meeting at your child's school or setting, and they go, here's mummy or daddy or grandma or whoever you may be, you say, it's Sam, nice to meet you. Thank you very much, because that holds you at a certain professional level. And little things that we can do to make sure that we are holding our professional space as well, because you are, as I said, the experts in your children. So making sure that you ask that you get minutes from any meeting that you take with the school, make sure you get everything in writing from anything that happens at your school, and not letting yourself be caught off guard. Terrible thing happens in schools a lot is you get the at the gate conversation. The at the gate, could we just borrow you for a moment, Mrs. Smith, to talk about, and say, that's lovely, and happily have that conversation, but could you please follow up by sending me an email, so that everything that you're doing is being accountable and you're holding yourself as an expert, because you are your child's expert and their advocate. So I think that's how I advise us when we're navigating those difficult things, is to put yourself almost like it's a job, that you are the expert.
Absolutely. And that's excellent advice. Can we go back a notch or two to really, what do you find are the greatest difficulties? So many of our attendees today will primarily be made up, I would imagine today, of many families, both fostered carers, adoptive families, SGOs, special guardianship orders, birth families, that are struggling with children in education primarily, but there'll also be a lot of professionals on here. We do have a lot of professionals, a lot of teachers, a lot of social workers, pediatricians attend our webinars as well, and so do GPs. There's a whole array of people that will be attending today, and they'll want to know, first of all, where are those problem areas for most of our families that you would see? Can you tell us about some of those journeys?
So I think sometimes it's just getting educational settings in particular to understand what FASD is in the first place, and why should they be supporting your child. What is it that your child's barriers are in the classroom, or what struggles might they be facing, and helping them to unpick what those are within a framework of other things that might be going on for that child, particularly children that have suffered from trauma, maybe through fostering or adoption or whatever. So helping them to actually understand what FASD is in the first place. That is one of the biggest things that our parents face. They'll say, my child has diagnosis of, and they'll get met with, I don't know what that is.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's not the same as in other neurological conditions like autism, where people seem to have wealth of knowledge, even though there's that big crossover in the kinds of challenges that we face. There's just that lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding, and sometimes a tendency to jump to conclusions about the things that our children are showing and making assumptions based on misinformation. So if a child is struggling to regulate themselves in school, that child is just being naughty or difficult, and actually maybe there's more going on that would be explained by their neurological condition. And I suppose understanding the fact that FASD is a long-term condition. It's a lifetime condition. This isn't going to go away. It's not something that you can put a band-aid over, and understand that planning for life I think lots of parents are coming in and saying, you know, I want help for the next stage in my child's education. I want help for the future. And actually maybe school's not recognising that this is a lifelong condition and this is something that's going to be going on forever for this child or young person.
Absolutely. And this is something that I know all organisations around the country are trying to work with, upskilling, schools, social care. Everybody within the care system needs upskilling on understanding what FASD is, not just the care system, the criminal justice system. It goes much further afield.
Yeah, it does. It's bigger.
Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons with the new NICE quality standards that came out last year, we really fought hard to have the inclusion of the management plan. The fifth quality standard was all about that management plan. And it's a difficulty, actually, because we've been talking over previous webinars, and feel free to go and update yourself with those, anybody that needs to. But we were talking about how are we going to be able to implement this management plan. It's great having it there, but the infrastructure is
what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's not ready for it as yet. However, we can start working on that by educating. And every one of us, we have FASD awareness, have built up these very useful tools, and they're educational films that help people in a very short, succinct way understand what FASD is. We've got case studies as well, and those films are there to be able to share easily from our YouTube channel to a teacher that doesn't understand it, to a social worker that is trying to learn and understand. We also, alongside lots of other organisations in the UK Alliance, offer training to much wider organisations and schools. So, but you have to become the most informed people.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to go in and say, do you understand what FASD is? If you don't,
yeah, here are the resources, and this is where I'm going to point you. I said, be a site, you know, I was talking about, I made a few notes earlier. One of my notes was, you need to be a signposter, show people, tell people about this condition, make them take notice. Because one of the biggest barriers I have is we offer, as part of my job, FASD, very generic awareness training, and yet it's not often picked up by schools, despite the fact that I'm constantly saying, you know, it's here, because their argument is we don't have any of that. We don't have any of those problems. And the likelihood is actually they do, but it's just under the radar. They're just not seeing the level of need that's there. So we need to be telling them as parents, you know, my child, this is where you can find the information, and this is.
And can I also come in on that, because you know, you mentioned that your expertise, your area of expertise is in the younger age group, and of course you've got children that are younger than 6, and 6 is usually the sort of age that we're looking. I'm looking at the questions here as well, and there are questions about diagnosis. There is a very good webinar that we delivered with Dr. Raja Mukherjee, one of the leading specialists in the UK, and his clinic talk about that whole process of diagnosis. So please do go back and refer to the second webinar we gave on that. And to summarize what he was saying was, usually they don't take in a diagnosis, a potential diagnosis, until the age of 6 years old. And the reason for that is that they say that a lot of the presentations don't come out until that later stage, at that age, when they're in school, when they're developing their social skills, when they're developing their speech and language, when they're developing all of these other areas where they can actually pinpoint a greater diagnosis. That's the reason why you might be delayed. If you know, you might have the information there that birth mother has been drinking during pregnancy, and that crucial information will go a long way to giving you that diagnosis. However, you do need, it's a multidisciplinary approach to diagnosis. So therefore, it's an expensive process. We do have in the Southeast at the moment a new hub and spoke model where pediatricians are taking that responsibility and actually working within their connections into getting the diagnosis, and then signposting them through to Raja's clinic. So this is a new model that's being trialed in the Southeast at the moment. But can we talk about that whole early gap, because what can parents do? They suspect they've got a child with FASD, they've got the evidence there. What can they do as parents to help support that diagnosis for when that time arrives?
So I'm thinking of very young children, so sort of really, really little children. The first port of call, I think, in terms of looking at neurological differences in children is the 2-year check with your health visitor that every child gets. If you've got a child young enough to be going to their 2-year check, that is the first point of call where you might be able to say, actually, I'm noticing that my child is developing differently. I suspect it's because of this background, and open up those lines of discussion. You'll likely be sent down other referral pathways, things like portage services, for example. If you have those in your area, they're not in every area, but they are in some areas, which is early intervention. You may be signposted onto an ASD pathway because they want to rule that in or out for your child, depending on what's going on for them, maybe speech and language. But getting all of these things in place will help in the future, and getting that referral into the paediatrician so that you can begin building a picture of your child's strengths and difficulties. And that's literally where we are with both of my children at the moment. We're building that picture for them. We're a bit further ahead with my son than we are with my daughter, but we're basically eliminating other potential factors, ready to take that to the clinic once he is old enough.
And also, you learn, don't you? Because you said absolutely rightly so that, you know, these parents are the specialists of FASD, because every child, the spectrum is so vast that every child presents in a very different way. So therefore, exactly. So we need to be able to identify what those ways are, and cataloging, writing up your own diaries, evidence, because Raja will tell you, if you've got a family that comes into his clinic, or any pediatrician, we work very closely with Dr. Soji Abiona, and he says it's a breath of fresh air when a family come in and they've got documented evidence, written diaries to show behaviors that they've picked up on and noticed. It also allows your radar starts to pinging, doesn't it?
Yes, you start noticing things as you go along, and the more informed you become yourself about your own children, and maybe also by looking at resources like this and joining in with webinars like this, the more informed you become, the more you are able to recognize, and the more you're able to advocate for your child, which is exactly why we're all here and why we want to do this. I think, diaries are great. Keeping a diary, even if it's a long-term diary, it's just once a year I write about how my child's developed this year, you're going to see those things that, you know, maybe are becoming strengths for your child, but also might be becoming challenges for your child as well. So that's a really good way of doing it. I'm just thinking, if you're slightly older, maybe a bit older than the 2-year check, maybe they're coming into school, that's conversations to be had with SENCOs. You know, they'll pick up pretty quickly in schools whether a child is maybe struggling in any way, and having those conversations early on, making sure SENCOs are aware of any background that your child might have that might impact their neurological development. You don't have to go into details, they don't need to know your whole life story, but getting them on board and making sure that they are also watching out for your child is really important. Even if they don't fully understand what FASD is, if they're looking out for signs that your child is struggling, then they'll be able to pinpoint you and signpost you in the right directions for support.
Absolutely. And I remember last time you were on our support group, and we brought up the fact about SENCOs. You have been a SENCO, and you came up with this amazing fact that I think a lot of people need to understand about SENCOs, and actually have a degree of sympathy with the SENCO, but at the same time, it makes us aware that we are a little bit specialist.
It's a little bit tricky. So SENCOs can begin the role as a SENCO with absolutely no special needs qualification whatsoever. So with just the basic training they get as a teacher. Now they do have to undertake training once they have become a SENCO, but day one walking into the job, there is no requirement for your SENCO to have completed that qualification. They need to be working towards it, but they might not have completed any qualifications at that point. So you may be dealing with someone who is not as knowledgeable as you are. So that though they seem like they're the gatekeeper and the holder of all this information, actually that may not be the case. And this is where services like mine are important. We're not the only service that do this, but we come in and we can support schools and make sure that they are meeting their end of the bargain, if you like. So the graduated approach, which is in the SEN Code of Practice, which says that the school needs to have met certain standards before they can apply for an EHCP, for example, making sure that everything is in place for a child. We can do that alongside a SENCO and support them and train them and develop them. But that process happens through a local inclusion forum team lift meeting. So it's about allocating a child through that process. So a SENCO in a school or a nursery or a further education setting will present your child's case at a meeting, a little bit like this, virtual like this, and people like myself will be allocated the case. But you need to advocate for that, and sometimes it does take a push. It takes you going in and saying, I would like my child to be discussed at a lift meeting in order for you to access support from specialist teaching and learning services. In some areas we have a different name, so we're called outreach workers or inclusion support workers, but we're all the same thing. So in Thanet, for example, in Kent, they're called TIS for reasons I'm not really sure why, but we're all the same job. They're the Thanet inclusion team. And
how do you get that resource? How do you access that?
So through the lift process. So you go to if your child is in an education setting of any kind, right the way down to nursery if they're really little, or right the way up into college if they are, you know, post 16 or wherever they may be post 16, you can ask the SENCO to refer to the lift process, local inclusion forum team.
That's
and there will be an equivalent of that in every area.
Because again, quite a few of the questions that are coming in, and I'll answer them live if I may, to all those that are writing in. This would be one of the most important areas where you can actually access and have all your questions answered. They will be able to support you with your specific needs and be able to refer you on. I'm going to come back a little bit and just talk about you mentioned about teachers in schools as well. And we spoke about training. Now, I know we've offered training in a number of schools in Kent and Medway. And one of the things that has been shocking, they had one case in one school where an individual has come into the school with FASD. They wanted to upskill their school and they felt it was important to upskill the teachers on a training development day. So we went in and gave them a conference or an overview of what FASD is and what they're going to be looking for in the school environment. Within 2 weeks, many of those teachers had gone on to study further and were identifying individuals in their school that they felt actually it shouted out, not ADHD, not necessarily ASD, but there was something else there underlying. And so they were able to refer those or bring those into the SENCO, and that SENCO has then become far more informed and has got more involved. This is the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. The more that we bring awareness to people, the more that can happen. And that's certainly happened in the areas where I've been shouting loudly about FASD in I work in Dover, Deal and Sandwich. And I've started, mentioning this to schools. I had a specific case where that child had already got a diagnosis. And so I offered some training to the school. And from then, that's a discussion now that is had early on when a child is presenting with a background that might suggest that fetal alcohol would be a part of that discussion. That question is being brought up sensitively and gently, but it means that schools are more aware and they're aware of asking the right questions and asking knowing the background of children before they come in.
Absolutely. And we've had quite a few people with lived experiences, quite a few adults that have come on and spoken about their childhood experiences in schools. And one of the things that has come across quite often is about having those teachers that instinctively understood FASD were able to support that individual far better and give them the space and the time to answer the questions, give them, see when they were being triggered and be able to give them a safe opportunity to come out of that space and not feel ostracized or neglected or victimized or, you know, like they're a problem child, but that this was an issue that they were having and they needed to manage that. Quite a lot of the experiences we talk about are from mainstream schools. There are also can that service, the lift service, also be accessed with special educational needs schools?
So no, so basically what happens is once a child is in a specialist setting, whether that's, you know, again, at whatever level, our service backs away because the school is then the specialist setting. They are the specialist. So basically when a child is in mainstream, we provide that outreach service from the specialist setting. And then once they're in the specialist setting, that's stopped because their teachers should have the knowledge to support them. That doesn't mean that the special schools can't access the training that we deliver, but they wouldn't have that one-on-one type service because their child is already in a specialist setting. And theoretically, their needs should be met by their EHCP plan and the things that are around them, because to be in a special school, that child will have had an EHCP plan put around them, sorry, EHC plan put around them. Now, that's all in an ideal world, and that doesn't always actually transpire, but that's the thinking, is that when a child has their EHC plan around them, then there should be enough people involved that they can manage that case.
And this has come on beautifully to where I wanted to go next. Thank you. And the EHC plans were originally called statements, weren't they?
Yes, they were, yeah. When I first started in education, they were statements. They're really different, actually, because a statement came with a guaranteed pot of money for the school. Now, funding in EHCPs works slightly differently than it did with the old statements. And you don't need an EHCP to get funding for your child. That can be done under the higher needs funding criteria. So this is a topic that I could talk about for ages, so I'll try and break it down really simply. But schools get their basic budget for each child, and then on top of that they have a special needs budget up to £6,000 for a child if that child has additional needs. If the child's additional needs cost more than £6,000, so for example they need a one-to-one TA, for example, or they're accessing lots of therapies that need specific, you know, financial packages, then they can access higher needs funding. That process doesn't need an EHCP. EHCPs also do have a package of money that can be attached to them for very, very complex cases, or for cases where children are not accessing education, and that's called a personal budget, but that's something slightly different. So the good news for parents is you do not need an education and healthcare plan to get funding for your child in schools. You can follow, the school can follow a higher needs funding application, which is really good news.
Absolutely.
But that's slightly different from the old statement.
Thank you for clarifying that, because that is a question we get asked frequently, isn't it? It's how do you access that funding? So can you explain to us the value of the EHC plans? Okay.
EHCPs are only as valuable as the support that comes with them and the continued redevelopment of that plan. Otherwise, they're just paper. Okay, so an EHC plan is only as good as the plan around it. So when it's good, when it's really good, and you've got smart targets for the child that are achievable but challenging, and when you've got a good team around them, when the provision that's written in the plan is really bespoke and really thoughtful, and it is reviewed on time annually every year, an EHC can, education and healthcare plan can support that child right the way through to 25, actually, it's birth to 25, and is a really, really powerful tool for making sure that there are essentially arms around a child all the way through their educational life. However, if that process, that reviewing process isn't happening, and that's where sometimes the EHCPs stop being useful, is when either the targets aren't good enough, they're wishy-washy, they're not smart enough, they're not child-centered enough, or the support package is not being met, they're no good. They're only just a piece of paper. So this is where parents need to be really on it about monitoring how good that EHCP is. Now they may not know, so there are services that can support that as well. So I've made a little list that came out with the webinar today, which has links to IPSI, which is the independent provider of SEN advice. They can talk about legal advice around EHCPs. They can support you with EHCP processes. They can even check the wording to make sure that the EHCP is actually robust enough if you get to that point. I also put in SENDIAS. So every area should have an SEND information and support service. I'm making sure I'm getting all the letters right. In Kent, which happens to be where I am, that's called IASK. So Independent Advisory Service Kent. But there will be one in every area. So if you're not Kent-based, if you Google SENDIAS and then your area, so SENDIAS London, SENDIAS Coventry, wherever you might be, there will be one in your area, and they can do that direct support for you in that way as well.
What I'll do is when we present this on YouTube, I'll also put those links in there as well. Thank you for that. So let's come back to the very beginning at the outset of the EHCP.
Yeah.
Who can ask for it? Can it be a parent? Can it be a carer, an individual family member?
Anyone with parental responsibility can request an EHCP, and they don't have to have the backing of an educational setting if they don't have that. Obviously, having the backing of an educational setting is helpful and makes this process smoother and easier. But in a lot of cases, parents are worried that, oh, my school's not backing me. I don't have the evidence. My child's not accessing school. I don't know what to do. You as a parent have the right to trigger a statutory assessment for your child.
And how do you go about
threshold? To do that, you go to your local authority website. By law, it has to be listed as how to do that underneath their special needs local offer. So it'll be different depending on what area you're in, but it should be on your local authority's website. And it's usually an online form that you need to fill in. If you can't find an online form, if you ring, and again, it'd be different in each area, but ring your local SEN office, they can tell you how to apply.
And you mentioned earlier as well, didn't you? It's really important when you're setting up that EHCP is to be able to show enough evidence for the child's needs and how to support that EHCP.
Absolutely. So if you're looking at evidence for asking for statutory assessment, you're looking at any medical reports that you might have, your own voice as a parent. One of the things that is important in the EHC process and is actually included in the plan is your voice as a parent. And even more importantly, if your child is able to, their voice. So child voice is in every single education and healthcare plan. And the more that your child can add to that, the better. Obviously, very young children aren't going to be able to give their deep and meaningful opinions. But if you've got an older child, if they can describe what life is like for them in their own words, that is the most powerful thing that you can put before an SEN officer. If you're not getting support if you've got support from the school will write what's called an Appendix 2, which will outline everything from the school, and that will support the application. If you're not getting a lot of support from the school, look at where else you might be able to get evidence of your child's needs. Is it worth going to the paediatrician asking them to write a letter? Is it worth going to your child's speech therapist or somebody like myself who, specialist teaching service, if they're open to them, and asking for that information as evidence for you? There are other ways to evidence things as well.
Excellent. And once you've got this in place, who's involved in an EHCP?
So you are involved as the parent, and obviously child voice as well. They will, if they agree to assess, which takes normally 6 weeks, so you normally get a reply within 6 weeks of whether or not they agree to assess, then they will do an information gather with any services that your child is open to, whether that's speech and language or occupational therapy, and they'll also contact your child's education setting and request an Appendix 2. My service, we also write an appendix. So if you're open to my service, we write what's called an Appendix 7, which is just jargon really, but basically we put our report in about how we think a child is doing, and give our recommendations as well. And then once all that's happened, your child, if they've agreed to assess, they will see an educational psychologist paid for by the county. And that will be usually a face-to-face meeting. Sometimes if a child can't manage a face-to-face meeting because it's too nerve-wracking or whatever, they can do it virtually, but usually it's a face-to-face meeting with an educational psychologist who will do an assessment and write a report. And that assessment is the bulk of the education and healthcare plan. What comes out of that assessment is the statutory assessment bit. That's where the planning then comes from. Then it takes about 20 weeks to get an EHCP. So the drafting part happens in about weeks 13 to 16. You should see a draft, and that will have all the recommendations from all the services that have been asked, collated, and some outcomes for your child. These are targets for your child. And this is where we really need to be looking at the language and making sure those targets are actually, are they suitable? Are they challenging but achievable? And how realistic is it that my school is actually going to be able to provide this service that is being asked for? So that's something to think about. If you're happy with the draft, you get a final after about 16 to 20 weeks. And that will also name a school. If you're asking for a change of placement, that happens at the very last hurdle. That's a whole other process. We could probably sit here for another hour and talk about how we choose schools. Yeah. But generally a school is named, either the school that you're in, or if you're looking at a change of placement, they might name a new school for your child. And if you're at phased transfer, so reception class, year 6 into year 7, and sometimes post 16, it's a bit tricky post 16, then they'll look at where your child will go next. So they'll name the school that's next up for your child.
Absolutely brilliant. And if you suspect an FASD diagnosis, to be able to get that EHCP, do you need an FASD diagnosis? No,
you don't need a diagnosis at all to get an EHCP of anything, actually. It's all based on need. So if you can prove that your child has the need for an EHCP, then that's all that matters. The threshold for an assessment is actually surprisingly low. So in order to meet their legal obligations, the local authority must assess a child if they may have a special educational need, and they may need support to access education. So those are, that's pretty low threshold. So when parents are getting turned down at the first hurdle, often that's because the local authority aren't actually meeting their statutory duty, which is to assess all of those.
Thank you for flagging that up, because that's something that we hear, don't we, quite often, is that parents say to us, well, the school have said we don't need an EHCP. School have said they don't fit the criteria of an EHCP. And so
threshold is very low.
Exactly. So therefore, you've heard it from Sam, you can do this yourself. And you can do it. Ideally, it would be much better if you did have the school support to back you. However, you can do this yourself.
Yeah,
and
you
it's
have
about
the power, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about getting...
There is a bit of a health warning on that. Although the agreement to assess is very, very low, actually getting an educational healthcare plan is a little bit higher. So you might be assessed and then it's no agreement to issue. And there are various reasons why they might not agree to issue a plan. You can still fight that. There's still an appeal process and a tribunal process, and there's a whole way of managing that as well. But that's a slightly higher threshold. But the agreement to assess is very low.
So tell us, what does the EHCP look like when you've got the final document? What does it look like?
So first and foremost, your child's picture should be on there if you've provided it, because at the end of the day, this is their plan. It's not the school's plan or your plan or the local authority's plan. It's their plan. And then their voice should be the first thing in the booklet. It should have their likes, their dislikes, any information that comes straight from the child, And obviously in very young children that can be hard to gather, but however they say it, if they say I like Thomas the Tank Engine and that's all they put, then that's great. We have their voice first because it's their plan. Second comes your voice. And then after that will be any information from the other services that have been involved, school and other services. And then you'll have a section which will outline the actions, what's going to happen next. So the targets for your child and what's going to happen in order to help them meet that target.
And who decides that?
So describe that. So it will have in each area of special education needs, so cognition and learning, communication and interaction, physical development, health, that you'll have a separate page, and at the top will be a target related to that area. If your child has a need in that area. If your child doesn't have a physical disability, then there won't be one in physical, for example, but there'll be a target for that area. The best advice I can have with targets is making sure that they're smart. So are they specific? And does everybody understand what that target actually means in practice? Because sometimes they're written in wishy-washy language that is not helpful to anybody. We need to know what that means. Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they realistic? And are they time measured? So normally they are quite long-term targets. So it might be by the end of Key Stage 1, by the end of Year 10, in 6 months' time. So they're normally quite long targets. So it's quite challenging targets.
Can I just come in on that? Sorry, 1 second. Who's writing this, by the way?
Oh, so the educational psychologists will be offering their opinions alongside other professionals, but the SEN officer ultimately writes.
So that SEN officer is the person that writes up the targets and the plan?
Yes, based on the information that they will have received. So when I write my part, my Appendix 7, I will give recommendations what I think a child needs.
Right.
So I might say, I think this child needs, try to give an example, sensory circuits twice a day, just a really easy example. And then that will be added into the recommendations, sensory circuits twice a day, blah, blah, in underneath the target. So it'll have the target and how we're going to meet that target underneath, and anyone involved in making sure that happens will be named across in a column. So if it's going to get 6 sessions of speech and language therapy, the speech and language therapist is then named there, because then they're held accountable. That's their job, to provide that. If the school are providing 25 minutes of maths catch up a week for whatever it might be, then they're named there. That's their job to do that. In my case, it might be specialist teachers to visit 3 times a year, and I'm there named.
That's and whose job is it to keep an eye and monitor that EHCP in the school? How do you engage the
school?
Yeah,
but realistically it's parents, because what needs to happen is if you've got an EHCP and you're thinking, actually my child is not making progress, they're not any better off, then it could be that those actions aren't being met.
Yeah,
if that happens, bear in mind that your EHCP is legally binding and everybody has agreed to this legal document, so you have the right to make a fuss. If it's not being met, then people are not meeting their legal duties. First step, I always say, is to go and speak to the school. They may not be meeting that duty through no fault of their own. For example, if a child is supposed to be having speech and language therapy and the speech therapist hasn't provided a report. So make sure that you find out why things are not happening for your child. Ask the SENCO to explain what your child's provision looks like and where there might be gaps. If you're still concerned, you can hold an informal review. This is similar to like an annual review, but you ask the SENCO, I would like an informal review of my child's plan. Everybody involved in the plan gets together and we look at those actions and who's responsible for what and what's been missing. Now, if nothing happens and still things are bad and you're still not getting anywhere, this is when you can raise a concern with the local authority and say, actually, my child's EHCP plan is not being met. I'm not happy. And then the onus is then on the local authority to make sure that the school follow their plan and everybody follows that.
As you've mentioned the local authority at this point, should do the local authority get a look in at the original stage of the EHCP, and actually are they involved in those meetings as well at a later stage?
So they should be. So what should happen is that every annual review, so the local authority, the SEN officer at the local authority writes the plan in the first place. But also there should be somebody called they change their names a lot, but placement evaluation officer is what they were called last time I knew, who will look at your child's placement and make sure that it is the right place for them and all the support is in place. And that's with the local authority. That happens at the point where the EHCP is written. Every year, when you have your annual review, that should go back to the local authority for them to make the changes to your child's EHCP and issue a new one. Now, a bit of a warning on that one. Currently in Kent, there are 12,000 12,000 EHCPs that are more than 12 months out of date.
Right.
So the backlog for annual reviews is ridiculous. So the battle doesn't end once you've got an EHCP. The battle then becomes, I need my child's annual review. Kent are working on that, and it is getting better. But it never ends. It's a battle to keep going.
Absolutely. Can I ask, what's the main areas of failure with an EHCP, and how can you mitigate those? What are the best ways to mitigate those?
The main thing is not planning with the child at the centre of that report. So people not putting the child first. So making targets that are either not achievable, not realistic, not meaningful to that child or young person, particularly with older children and young people who are involved in their own EHCP process. If it's not meaningful to them, they're not going to engage with it. So where EHCPs fall apart is when those targets, that in each of it's called section F, but in that target setting part are they're just words on paper, unless they are actually meaningful to the child and young person, to their family and to the educational setting, and everybody is committed to that.
And you've already flagged up legal support that can actually help in actually looking at the EHCP and saying, is this
robust
enough? And looking at then transitioning, because we have a lot of families that struggle with the transitions from primary school into secondary school. Can you talk to us about when is the best time to review the EHCP? Is it once they're established in the secondary school, or would it be before that in anticipation?
I would hope both. So I would hope an annual review would take place before you needed to name a school for your child going into year 7. If they've already got an education and healthcare plan in year 6, then there should be a meeting early in the year before you need to choose schools, where you sit down and have an annual review and talk about where the next place is going to be, and everybody plans for that next step. Then once they're in their new school and they're settled and they've had their settling in time, then we'll have another annual review. Is this working? What might need to change in light of them being here? What things have come up since they've started? So I'd hope both. Roughly 12 months apart, but it can be sooner. We call them annual reviews, but that's a bit of a misnomer, because actually you can call a review at any point. And if your child is struggling, the first thing to do is to call a review.
And let's say the child, if you're having a review and the child refuses point blank to have it at the school, can you have it in any place the child's choosing? Because as you said earlier, the child has to be at the center of this.
Yeah, so often the first person that needs to be invited to the meeting, and sometimes they won't be able to physically attend. If you're talking about a 5-year-old, they might not be able to physically attend the meeting, but their opinions should be sought nonetheless, even in non-verbal pupils who are working, even in profoundly disabled pupils. We need to get their thoughts and opinions first. So it is your child's plan. It's their plan. They should be invited to the meeting. If they can't attend the meeting because they're too young or because their needs are too complex, then their opinions should be sought. If they can attend the meeting but don't want to do it at school because school is anxiety producing because they don't want to be seen going into a SEN meeting, because they don't want to sit with, 10 adults in a room because they're 13 and that's terrifying, then that can happen. That can happen virtually. The beauty of technology now is that can happen virtually. It can happen in the home. It's unusual, but it can happen in the home, and it can happen in a neutral venue as well. So that could be somewhere like a local children's centre office, or another place where you've got a neutral space. Where I work, we have what's called the Smile Centre, which is where my offices are, but we have a room there that can be used for holding meetings, and it's just a neutral space that doesn't, it's not linked to the school, it's not linked to home, it's just.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if a child is in secondary school
Mm-hmm.
and that child is coming home and is really seen to be struggling at school in various different ways, and yet the school is saying, no, they seems to be doing really well, how can you challenge that? How can you go about that with the EHCP?
In this case, this child doesn't have an EHC yet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But it's really tricky, because sometimes if a child is academically making progress, it can be hard to show schools that actually there are other aspects that are weighing my child down, that are becoming challenging for my child. So the first thing I do is to have a meeting to talk about, what does success look like for my child? And actually your opinions and your child's opinion might not align with school, but it's important for the school to realise that that success might look different for your child. It might be that success for them isn't 10 GCSEs, but is going to school on a Monday morning in their uniform. That's success today. Sitting in maths lesson for 10 minutes might be a success for your child, and actually that's really important. The other thing is, if schools are saying actually your child it won't meet the criteria for an EHCP, they're not ready for an EHCP, the possibility is that that's right, but that's not the end of the conversation, and that should never be the end of the conversation. Even if the school are right that your child doesn't need an EHCP, they should still be signposting you on. They should still be saying, no, they don't need an EHCP, but
yeah,
here is another support service. Let's look at signposting to the local inclusion forum team like mine. Let's look at trying to see if we can get educational psychology in. Let's look at some therapy. Let's look at a transition program if they're in a phased transfer. That should never be the end of the conversation. So if you're battling with a school that's saying, no, they don't need an EHCP, they don't need an EHCP, so okay, well, what next then? Because I can tell you that my child is struggling, so what's next? If it's not an education and healthcare plan, what is there to support my child? Because they may be right, but that's not the end of the conversation.
Absolutely. Now let's say we've reviewed the EHCP and we're happy with what's happening. There've been a few amendments that we need to make, or that it's been flagged up in that meeting that we need to make these amendments. We're really happy with this. We're moving on with this, but we've noticed this. Do we get a new written document?
You should have a new written document. So what should happen is that your SENCO should send away the review of the annual, it's an annual review form that they fill out during the meeting, that with any changes that you want to make to the EHCP, including which people don't know, taking away the EHCP. That is also an option. So sometimes when children are post 16 and they don't want that support behind them anymore, and they're feeling independent, and they want to maybe lose the ties of that, they sometimes choose to close them. But yes, you make those changes, that goes sent to the local authority. They should respond with a newly written draft for you to look at, and then a newly written EHCP. I can't remember the timeframes off the top of my head, but it should be in a timely manner. That's where things are slowing down at the moment, and that's what's not happening. So it sometimes takes a few phone calls and a few emails and a few prods from parents to say, actually, you do have a duty to be providing me with a newly written education and healthcare plan that is reflective of my child at this moment in time, because otherwise it's pointless.
Absolutely. And I've just looked at the time. I can't believe how we've just flown
Sorry,
by.
it's gone really
You've
quickly.
given us so much amazing information. We have had somebody here. Can we have a time for a Q&A? I'm sorry, we can't do Q&As on these webinars. We have the questions in front of us. But where can people go for if they want further information on this? I know this is really
so definitely looking at the IPSE website that I looked at before, IPSEA IPSE website. Definitely looking at, there's a great website called SENSOS, which guides you through all sorts of different processes, things like higher needs funding, education, healthcare plans, if you get personal budgets, which are a whole other complicated part of education and healthcare plans, it can guide you through all of those things. Your local SENDIAS website that I explained before. If you want to look at where I work, we do have some resources and things available. They tend to be aimed at schools, but there's always useful bits that you can pick up from there. I work for Dover STLS. If you just type that into Google, you'll find our website. We've got resources, webinars that you can watch, training videos that you can watch, and that you can signpost your school to as well. So actually, there's this great video you can watch, and it's only 10 minutes long. So yeah, I can't remember what else I put on my list, but there's a list that's going out.
And we will make sure that that goes up on the YouTube video as well.
Oh, sorry, Scope also
yeah, absolutely. We'll include that one as well. Sam, thank you so much. I know every time we talk to you, we just bombard you with so many questions because you're so helpful and you put it in a very simple, succinct way, which is exactly what we all need. I know that one of the we can't answer all the questions, but I hope we've covered a lot in the hour that we've had with Sam. I know Tracy and I have spoken. We spoke before we came on air as well, and we said that one of the future topics we want to cover is going to be where we cover a lot of strategies for FASD individuals within the school environments and on a daily basis at home, and technical issues that so many of our families struggle with in our support groups. So we will have one of those coming up very soon, and Sam will be on that as well, following up with the great work that she's been doing tonight. So Sam, thank you so much. We really
enjoyed it.
All your work. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us again. I hope you found this useful. Do go back to our YouTube channel and have a look at some of the previous information. We always say the better educated you are, the more you are able to go and fight your corner. And we say fight because that's what it is. So often it's a fight and a battle to get what your individual at the center of all of this deserves and what they need. So it leads to better outcomes. It leads to positive outcomes. And that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for journeys that lead to positive outcomes. Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely night. See you soon. All the best. Thanks, Sam.